Welcome to the Leo Training Podcast with Joe DeLeo. You'll hear in-depth interviews and tips from world-class athletes, coaches, and industry-leading experts to help you train smarter and improve at what you love to do. Train smarter, get stronger, move better, race faster. Here's your host, Joe DeLeo.
This is your host, Joe DeLeo, and I am thrilled to bring you another brand new episode on the Leo Training Podcast. If you're tuning in to listen for the first time, this is your podcast resource for all things rowing related. Most of the topics usually fall into some of the following categories: performance, strength and conditioning, injury prevention, and rehabilitation. And I also interview athletes and coaches so you get their insights and perspectives on the sport of rowing. If you have an idea for a guest or a topic, I would love to hear from you. Feel free to send me an email at joe@leotraining.io or send me a direct message on Instagram or on my Facebook page. You can find both at the handle Leo Training. Finally, be sure to subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, found through iTunes and Stitcher. And if you feel so inclined, I would love if you would drop in a 5-star review. It really helps the show to grow. Now, on to the interview. My guest for this interview is Aquil Abdullah. I am very excited to interview Aquil as I've met him a few times in person, and we are both alumni from the George Washington University. Here is a breakdown of some of his accomplishments in the sport of rowing, as well as some of the topics that we will be discussing. Aquil H. Abdullah won 4 letters in men's rowing at GW from 1992 to 1996. Aquil narrowly missed qualifying for the 2000 Summer Olympics at Sydney by 33 hundredths of a second. After losing in the 2000 Olympic trials, Aquil considered retiring from the sport. Instead, however, he resumed his training, competed again, and won the Elite Diamond Sculls race at the prestigious Henley Royal Regatta at Henley-on-the-Thames in London in 2000. Aquil continued with his training in the lead up to the 2004 Summer Olympics in Athens, Greece, and would go on to compete in the men's double scull event with Henry Newsom. This is his story. I'm very pleased to welcome onto the Leo Training Podcast fellow GW rowing alum and Olympian, Aquil Abdullah. Aquil, good morning. Welcome to the show.
Good morning, Leo. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. My pleasure. I'm really excited that you're here. It's a big honor for me. I remember when you came and visited GW my senior year in high school, and I believe you were in town. I think that weekend you were getting inducted into the GW Hall of Fame, if that was correct. Does that sound accurate?
Yes, that sounds about right. Okay. I remember getting asked to come and talk to you guys and see how the team was going.
Awesome. So one of the reasons I got prompted to reach out to you is there was a recent article on U.S. Rowing titled Athletes Past and Present. And I thought it was very interesting, some of the information, your backstory that you shared and kind of how you came into the sport of rowing. So I was hoping that we could kind of start with that and you could share, how you found the sport.
Yeah, I sort of stumbled into rowing. Like many things in my life, I sort of just got lucky. I was trying to stay in shape in the spring of my senior year, and I wanted to play football in college. And so I had run track, but I thought that rowing might be easier, which would allow me more time to sort of goof off. But it turned out that it was pretty hard. I would always walk by and see guys rowing on the ergs and puking, and I just said, man, I don't really want to be a part of that. But once I got on the rowing machine, I enjoyed it. And then once we got on the water, and for me, rowing on the Potomac It just felt like, the place I was supposed to be. And then I think what really sealed the deal was it was senior beach week or something like that, and I was ready to leave the house, and my mom is standing at the bottom of the stairs, and she said, "Where are you going to college next year?" And I was like, I don't know. I had been offered a couple of different scholarships, and she said, "Well, you're not leaving the house until you decide." And I thought about it for a few minutes, and I said, "Okay, I'll go. I'll row." And part of that was an economic decision. It just was the package offered by GW was the best package for me financially and our family. But the other part of it was that in the few short months that I had been rowing, I had really come to love the sport and the people in the sport.
Wow. Yeah. So I'm curious. So, that's a pretty big shift going from, potentially playing collegiate football to rowing. So what are some of the other things that made you kind of step back and say, wow, this is kind of where I want to go athletically for the next couple of years of my life?
Yeah. So while I enjoyed football, I really didn't see myself as being a professional football player. I enjoyed the sport. I played it for numerous years. My father had played football. But in the end, I didn't see myself progressing past college in the sport. And rowing seemed like one of those sports where if you put in the hard work and effort, I saw it as having the ability to go far in the sport. And so that was part of the differentiator in terms of my athletic career that helped me make the decision.
Sure. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. So did you have some early success in that spring when you first started coming into the sport of rowing? You kind of felt like you had some better long-term potential in that sport compared to football?
Yeah, I think that, I will say this. I think that it's kind of tough as young athletes to sort of decide where you want to go and what you want to do. But I think that you gain so much from participating in different sports, just in terms of the muscle, the physical requirements from sports are different. And so getting that foundation was important to me. I played a number of different sports. And so, I think that rowing for me just was the right fit.
Awesome. So you got to GW and rowed all 4 years there. And, while at GW, you're primarily in the 8. So can you talk about some of, what that experience is like? And then, kind of what are some of the challenges you faced during that 4 years of college?
Right. So college for me, I mean, it was a great experience. I think that one of the biggest challenges was coming to GW and knowing about the sport, but not having a real grasp of where GW was in the universe of rowing. And so when I got there, I was lucky to have teammates that really wanted to sort of take the program to the next level. And so coming in as this, freshman who had rowed for probably like 4 or 5 months, and going up against these guys, the seniors or juniors who had been there a long time and making the varsity boat, I think was probably a bitter pill for some of those guys. But I think that rowing, the big transitions for me were in the amount of work that had to be done, and actually transforming the program by saying, okay, we have to go beyond what the coach is asking of us. We have to actually come down here and just get together and train together outside of the practices that we have as a team, And so for me, the big difference in moving from sort of high school to college was increasing my own desire to excel and understanding what it took to sort of push the team to the next level.
Yeah, it sounds like you had a really good chemistry across the team there, and the intent and the focus, the desire was to, like as you said, elevate the team, get it to the program to that next level, and you guys are putting in additional work outside of the training sessions at scheduled practices and stuff to get better, to improve.
Yeah. So I'll give you an anecdote. So like I showed up, there was myself and there was another guy named Tim Downs who had come from LaSalle. And I can remember on a couple of our first runs, he was out in front and trying to, mow everybody down. And he kept seeing me and he was just like, this guy's, we're actually good friends still to this day. But, as freshmen, we just got together and we said, all right, we're going to push it. We're going to really make this happen. And we would get together in erg in the afternoon because we had, morning practices, and really had these great, ridiculous dreams for how good we were going to be. But there were also seniors there who wanted the same thing and juniors who wanted the same thing. So I think overall it really helped the program that there was this infusion of young guys who wanted to be successful, and this sort of old guard that was like, hey, we have a chance to actually be better, in the Dadville League, in the Champions League at that time. And I really credit that to sort of the foresight of Paul Wilkins, who was the overall coach, and John Devlin, who was the men's coach at the time.
Very cool. So I'm just curious, have you always sort of had like an innate, natural kind of competitiveness to when it comes to sport?
I like to say that I have what's sort of called a sneaky competitiveness, in the sense that like I'm a joker. I'm always, joking around, and, I would be on the starting line. And I think like people loved me and hated me in the sport a little bit because I'd be on the starting line, like cracking jokes, but that's basically getting into people's head, or getting into their heads. So I am extremely competitive, but I also sort of understand that in the end, it's a game. In the end, life and relationships are so much more important. And even in the pursuit of, my athletic accomplishments, which I probably destroyed some relationships based on my focus, I try to always keep things in perspective. So yes, I have sort of this innate competitiveness, like even walking down the street, like if I'm walking with someone, like I don't want to be walking slower, right. So yes, I do have a innate competitiveness, but I like to think that it's a little bit sneaky because I try to hide it.
No, I love that. I mean, it's definitely something I've picked up on just in this conversation, but in some of the in the few times that I've had the opportunity to be around you in person. So my follow-up question to that is, do you attribute that to just sort of life experiences, or is that something your parents instilled in you? Where did that kind of come from?
That's a good question. I think that part of it is just the nature of who I am. Um, my dad was one of those dads who didn't let you win. So, like we would play basketball. He didn't let me win. I had to beat him. And then when I started to beat him, he started to cheat. So, so it's all of those things that help. And I think that the thing that my mother gave me, my dad gave me my competitiveness, definitely, but I think that my mom gave me sort of my compassion and sort of the seeing things in a larger perspective. So I'd say that it's a combination of all of those things. Of both my, growing up around people that were exceptional, and sort of the way that my parents raised me.
Awesome. Very cool. Very cool. Thank you for sharing that. So what are some of the kind of the biggest takeaways you had during that 4 years rowing at GW, and what led you to kind of take the next step and go towards a national team? Like what led to that?
So the summer after my freshman year, there was at the time there was a development camp at Potomac Boat Club. And I said, oh, you know what? Yeah, that's great. I'll row in the summer. And I walked up to Tony Johnson. I think Tony Johnson and Ken Dreyfus were there at the time. And Tony, he knew me because he was the head coach at Georgetown at the time, the men's coach at Georgetown. And he basically said, Aquil, we have a lot of good guys coming. So, there were guys from Dartmouth and Stanford and, Brown. There were some really up and coming and good rowers there at the time. And then there was this guy, me, that no one had ever really heard of from GW. I think there might have been one other guy, Brian Winky, from GW, who was a pretty big guy and also had a lot of potential. I think it was the World University Games one year, and trained for a bit out in San Diego. But I think Tony sort of said, why don't you try sculling out? And so I did some sculling, but I also did some sweep rowing as well. I was probably in the third four or something like that. And I really sort of realized man, I've got a lot of work to do if I want to really excel at this sport. There's a lot of good guys here, and right now I'm not even close. So I sort of took that as the as sort of being put on notice that I had some work to do. And I got really lucky in that Ken Dreyfus was there to sort of give me some guidance in sculling, and that my coach, John Devlin, had a single. And he was like, take my single out anytime you want. And he was a member at Potomac Boat Club. So I just go out and row and flip and row and flip and, all up and down the Potomac River. So, but that really was sort of the starting point for me. And from there, I returned to think again for another development camp in my sophomore year. But by that time, I was much better. I was able to vie for being in some of the eights, in the quads, and so I was starting to progress a little bit.
Awesome. Very, very cool. Very cool. So just kind of to give the audience a little bit more kind of perspective. So, to give some more perspective. So the other athletes that you were around at the time, Like, can you talk a little bit about, for anybody that doesn't know you, how did you physically compare to them? Because I'm sure there were some guys that were a lot bigger, right? And I've met you, so I know that you're probably similar in size and body weight to me, more of a midweight really than a heavyweight.
Right. So here's the story. So my freshman year, I got really sick. So I'm like 6'2". At the time, I was like 6'2", 180 pounds. So at the time, I got sick right before Mid-Atlantic sprints. And that I had never considered rowing as a lightweight, but my coach, I was recovering, I was feeling fine, but my coach at the time said, well, why don't you've been sick this whole time. I had a fever or something. And so I was close to being a lightweight. So he was like, why don't you just row as a lightweight? And so I actually rowed once as a lightweight. And that was the only time I rowed as a lightweight. And I said, I'm never doing that again. And so I said, if I don't make it as a heavyweight, then there's no way I could do this. But, you're right. I fit in that midweight category. And I think one of my challenges has always been was I never had a huge earth score. I think my best was 601. And, you're going up against guys that are going 49, that are really like crushing and putting the hammer down on the earth just to get noticed, and so it was always when I showed up and I saw those guys and I was like, man, these guys are big. There was definitely some doubt, but, as the sneaky competitor, I always, had the motivation and sort of the desire to excel even in that arena. I think one of the funnier stories, although he'll never admit it, was that when I was rowing, when I was in college, Chris Korzanowski was the men's coach, and he had come down to DC and was, I don't know if it was a camp or something, and someone pointed him out to me, and I said to him, oh, Mr. Korzanowski, someday I'd like to, row on the U.S. national team. And he said to me, he's like, no, you are too small. And I think one of the happiest days of my life was when he returned to the U.S. in 2001, and I was one of the top single scullers in the country at the time.
That's awesome.
And he'll never admit it. He says, I don't remember, but I remember. So, but
very cool.
It just in terms of where I stand in stature to a lot of the guys I competed against.
Very cool. Yeah, and I'm sure that helped to fuel the fire and motivate you quite a bit there. What for guys that are in that kind of midweight body type, what are some good pieces of advice that you would give to them if they are training, right? Whether they're in college or they want to pursue stuff after college at a club or national team or international level, kind of being one of those guys that had some excellent success at that next level. Like, what are things that you needed to do that would benefit them?
Learn how to row. I know it sounds simple, but I think that part of my success, there's two things. One is become extremely technically gifted. And two is to put yourself in the situation when you're up against the best people you can find. I look at guys like Jason Reed, who was in the gold medal 8. He's another guy that's that's not a big guy. And you just have to basically be like a pit bull. And for me, success really started to come when I came to Boston and I started training with Jamie Coben. He shellacked me. Like when I first got here, he agreed, say, yeah, come on up and we can train together. And this is after he had won the world championships. And he put the hurt hurt on me, something fierce. But at the time, I was basically riding my bike everywhere. I rode a lot of steady state, just trying to learn how to move the boat. And then that really helped me, I think, learning how to move the boat, and then getting physically as strong as I could. Really helped me. So, like, if you're a midweight guy, you have to row well. You have to be able to let the boat move when your oars aren't in the water. And you just have to get as strong as you possibly can. I think that the adage that herbs don't float is true, but they get you in the door.
Yep.
Like you have to be at a certain level of strength in order to compete. And that's just the bottom line.
100%. Yeah, absolutely. So what are some of the, so two questions. So one is, what are some of the things like you kind of touched on, you go out and row steady state and really learning to find the boat and move the boat well and let the boat do some of the work on the recovery. And then two is like physically getting as strong as possible. So were you doing stuff outside of rowing, like strength and conditioning to do that? If so, what were some of those things?
Right. And so once again, I attribute this to some of my luckiness, but I went and I trained with Igor Grinko for a time, and man, like the weight workouts we did, like the number of just like cleans, the number of just squats and bench rows and all of the things, just like just to get physically stronger was sort of what I was doing. And I think that you really do have to try to strike the balance between sort of building the muscle that you need to be strong enough to row and, also having the aerobic capacity. Because a lot of it is, in my opinion, is that you get to a point in a race and you have to have another gear. That other gear comes from both the aerobic capacity, but the strength, the muscle strength to actually keep the boat moving.
I love it. That's a great quote.
Yeah.
Thank you. So we're kind of post GW. You're, last city you mentioned, you're up in Boston, you're training with Jamie Coven. So my next question for you is, was there something, or at a certain point, like you had been to some camps and some selection events or testing procedures for the U.S. national team, was there a certain point where you're kind of like, okay, I'm going to go in the direction of the single versus like a sweep boat, or the single was something you enjoyed and you were like, oh, I want to do this?
Yeah. So at first it was just that the single, as I said, going back to being a midweight. At first it was that the single was a way for me to prove myself independent of anything else. Like you go out and you win the U.S. national championships in the single, like coaches say, oh, well, that there's maybe this guy can row. And so for me, that was how I got my foot in the door. And then it just happened that like I loved sculling. I did some sweep, like when I was training at Princeton, at the time, Mike Patey was about having us do pretty much everything. And so we rode sweep. At one point, I was rowing the pair with Gabe Winkler, and we actually did pretty well, like a lightweight and a sculler. So, but for me, my love was definitely for sculling.
Awesome. Very, very cool. Do you think that I've heard this quote, I don't know if I could attribute to one specific coach, but the idea that scullers make the best boat movers. Do you think that's true?
I don't necessarily agree with that. Because I think that you have some guys, if you look at guys, I think that sculling helps to build a great foundation for rowing in general. But you have some guys who are just like tremendous sweep athletes who don't necessarily scull, or don't scull that much, So I think that while, you have you do have some athletes who are able to do really well in sculling and sweep. I think that what I would say is that knowing how to scull helps you tremendously, because it's something you can do by yourself, and it really can teach you how to feel the boat moving. But that being said, I think that you have some great sweep rowers who, if they decided to scull, probably would do really well. I don't know. I've been out of the game for a long time, so that's just my opinion. I don't necessarily agree with it. I know that there are some tremendous athletes who did not scull, and so that would just sweep. So
no, that was great. I was just curious to get your perspective.
Yeah.
So you were training at at various locations up in Boston, and then I'm guessing at some point down in Princeton and stuff. And then you, kind of the continuing your training, going to various cup races, and then leading all the way up to the 04 games. So what are some of the things along the way that kind of really helped prepare you for that? And was there something specific that made you kind of decide to move from to go from the single to the double? Because I think, originally you were going for the single in 2000.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. So so basically, I think that there's you have me thinking of a couple of things. One, I'll say this first before I get back to sort of my path, that you have, as someone training for the Olympics, you really have to think about things in terms of the quadrennial. You can't train as hard as you do 4 years, out as you do like the year before. You have to think about not only how it affects your training, but your psychology. We were able to, in 2001, I worked way more than I did in 2003. There's if the Olympics is something that is your goal, then I think it's important to think about how you balance your life as well as your training throughout that quadrennial. Now, as for me, moving from the single, how that sort of dovetails into what I was going to say is that for me, rowing the single is a lonely endeavor, or it can be a lonely endeavor. So in 2001, after losing to Don Smith in the single I thought that, like, hey, maybe I'll try out some team boats. The push was to try to make a fast quad. So, I was invited, like, hey, come and try to make the quad, And so in 2001, I could have rowed the single. I could have rowed in the quad again. I could have rowed in the single. But I thought that from both a mental perspective and just sort of like, hey, let's see if we can actually make this quad fast perspective. I decided that I wanted to sort of try to see how that worked out,
Very cool.
So,
yeah.
We just happened to get a group of guys that we weren't as fast as the quad 96, But I think we did pretty well that year. We were like fifth, I think, maybe at Lucerne in the World Championships. So it was a pretty fun experience. And then moving back to after that, so I decided to go back to the single. And in 2002, I raced the single in Seville at the World Championships. And I forgot what I came in there. I was in the B final. I forget where I came in, but I realized that it is possible for a lot of countries to find one really good rower. So, just from a pragmatic standpoint of recognizing where I was as an athlete in competition to some of the best scullers in the world, I thought that, okay, well, I had good success in the team boat, so like maybe I'll give that another try. And to be honest, like for Henry and I, we rode the double in Athens, even leading up to the trials and national selection regattas, we did not click. Like we would have times where we would go really fast and times where we would go really slow. It's odd that and like this is training throughout the whole 2003. It was odd that in 2004 at the national selection regatta, first national selection regatta, we just started moving the boat, and for some reason it just clicked, and we just kept getting faster. And so we said, hey, you know what? We've got a lot of room to grow. Let's see how fast we can grow. And so that's sort of how the double evolved. Henry had actually been rowing with someone else.
Oh, wow.
And it was looking like I might be competing for the single again. But we managed to sort of sort it out, and it got fast. So
awesome. So that in the Olympics, like as the regatta progressed, correct me if I'm wrong, because I remember watching this on the YouTube video. You guys had to you were the seventh boat in the final, right? Is that correct?
Well, it was a question of who was sixth and who was seventh.
Okay, sorry.
We in the semifinals,
right?
And so it was a dead heat essentially for third place in our semifinal, and so they allowed two boats to advance. I think it was Norway and us, and so we managed to beat my good buddy Nito in the in the final. So we ended up being sixth, but it was a dead heat, and it was the first time in a long time that there had been a 7-boat Olympic final.
Wow. So, what was, if you can remember, like you cross the start line, you're obviously just like, your body's just totally and completely exhausted, and you're like watching the times come down the board, and you like see the dead heat time, for tied for third there, and you're like, what do you remember what was going through your mind at that moment? Kind of like, are they going to have a 7-boat final, or are they going to make us do a re-row, or?
Yeah. No, we didn't know. I don't think we actually really knew until we were coming off the water on the docks. I think there's a picture of me hugging Henry as when we found out that we were going to be in the final. And it was, I think we sort of emptied the tank in order to get to the finals. So, I was happy to have the opportunity to race, for a medal. One of the things that I've been taught in the sport of rowing is that, or in sport in general, is that all you can ask for is an opportunity, is a shot, and then what you make of that opportunity is is on you. So we got to the finals, and we had an opportunity, and we did the best we could with that opportunity. So it was pretty amazing to be in the Olympic finals.
Yes, I can only imagine that. And you kind of actually came full circle and touched on this really great response you gave in that U.S. rowing write up from February. What impact has rowing had on you personally? And I'm just going to read this for the audience, and I'll put a link in the show notes. But the sport of rowing itself taught me how to put an oar in the water and take it out. It is the people that I met on my journey in the sport that have had the most impact on my life. My coaches taught me that I was entitled to nothing, and that hard work and focus prepared you for the opportunity to be successful, but did not guarantee success. My teammates showed me what it meant to be committed to something greater than yourself and how to persevere in the face of adversity. Finally, my fellow competitors taught me how to push my limits and that there is always another race until there isn't. Yeah. So that one, that really jumped out to me from the entire article. That was very profound. And I thought it was kind of very great perspective, sort of over the course of, your entire rowing career, like all these lessons that you learned sort of very concisely put together in three to four sentences. So is there anything that you kind of had to add to that, like since the article came out, or reflecting upon, your rowing career and some of the things that you've learned that you would like to share with other people that you think is important to know?
I think that it is important to have perspective in all of the endeavors that you take on. It is tough to acknowledge our shortcomings sometimes, and we always have this notion. I think that I'm going to keep on practicing and I'll get better. And yes, you will get better. And you may or may not achieve your goals. But I think we focus so much on the outcome that we miss some of the great things that happen as part of the journey. And that really what I want as a human being is an opportunity. I don't want, like, you give me the opportunity, I'll make what I can out of that situation. And I think that that's what you have to do in training. Like you have to, given the opportunity to sit down on the erg and try to get a better score. I mean, that's a great opportunity to have. It may or may not happen. Given the opportunity to close some business deal, it may or may not happen, but you had the opportunity. And, we can look at, success or failure through many different lenses. For example, I lost the 2000 Olympic trials by 3300ths of a second to Don Smith. And I was crushed. There's no doubt about it. And I was pretty much ready to hang up my oars. But I think I got a call I think Mike Tatey might have reached out to me and said, hey, they want you to come over and row at the Henley Regatta. And so I was like, what, whatever, I'm fit. I might as well go and train. And I went over and raced and won the Henley Regatta. And so, and that sort of just showed you that, there are endless opportunities out there if we are willing to open ourselves up to them. And the sport of rowing itself, I'd like to say, didn't teach me much, but but the people in the sport taught me a whole lot.
Awesome. Wow. Well, I don't think we can leave it any better than that. That was great. So,
all right.
Unless you've got anything else that you'd like to add before we sign off, we'll wrap this one up. And I just asked you to hang on the line so I can give you a proper goodbye off air.
Okay, sounds good.
Thanks for listening to the Leo Training Podcast. Subscribe and get even more expert training tips at www.leotraining.io.